My name is Ethan Miller, the tattoo artist my father calls a disgrace. When my brother Michael announced his wedding into one of Boston's wealthiest families, I thought I'd finally stand by his side. Instead, my father banned me with 4 words, "You will embarrass us." I was cut from the guest list, erased from the family photo. But the gift I sent to that ballroom didn't just crash the wedding, it became the real spotlight, and nothing in my family was ever the same again. I grew up in a house that felt more like a showroom than a home in the northern suburbs of Seattle. Every corner gleamed, every piece of furniture was chosen to impress guests, and every word spoken seemed rehearsed. My father, Richard Miller, was a senior partner at a well-known law firm downtown. He carried himself with the kind of posture that told the world he was never wrong. My mother, Margaret, worked as a real estate agent for high-end properties. She was flawless at presenting both homes and people, including us, as if we were just another polished listing to be admired and sold. And then there was my older brother, Michael, 3 years ahead of me, who seemed born to fit into their world of sharp suits and controlled smiles. He was their golden boy, the constant source of pride at dinner parties, family gatherings, and holiday cards. Growing up in that house was like living under a constant spotlight. If Michael brought home an A, my father would beam as though the entire city should take notice. If I brought home a drawing or a story from school, it was met with polite silence, quickly followed by my father clearing his throat and asking Michael about debate club or his latest math score. From the very beginning, it was clear that Michael was the heir to everything my parents valued, while I was the one they didn't know what to do with. I started drawing as soon as I could hold a pencil. My notebooks were filled with sketches instead of notes, and the margins of every homework assignment carried tiny doodles that felt more important to me than the assignment itself. At 10 years old, I drew an entire mural across my bedroom wall in secret using cheap paints I bought with saved allowance money. When my father discovered it, he stood in the doorway, silent for a long moment, then shook his head. He told me to paint over it before the weekend. That was the first time I understood that my art was not just unappreciated, it was unwelcome. Meanwhile, Michael thrived. He was on the honor roll, captain of the debate team, the kind of student teachers loved and parents bragged about. Family dinners became a chorus of praise directed at him, while my own presence felt like an afterthought. My mother would gently remind me to sit up straighter, to keep my hands out of sight if ink or paint stains still clung to my skin. I learned early on that at our table you could be impressive or you could be invisible. Most nights I chose invisible. By the time I turned 16, the differences between us were carved into stone. Michael was already talking about Stanford, my father's dream school, and I was sneaking into old warehouses with friends to host underground art shows. We strung up lights, spray-painted backdrops, and let music echo off the cement walls. For a few hours, I felt free, surrounded by people who saw my creativity as something bold instead of shameful. Those nights kept me alive, even as my father's disapproval grew sharper with every passing day. His favorite phrase became a kind of soundtrack to my adolescence. "Ethan, doodling will not pay the bills." He repeated it so often it started to carve itself into me. A scar that deepened every time he looked at me with disappointment in his eyes. My mother rarely defended me. She would press her lips together, smooth the tablecloth, and change the subject. Sometimes late at night she would knock on my door, place a hand on my shoulder, and whisper that my father would come around eventually. But the words sounded hollow even to her. The turning point came when I was 18. I had been saving tips from my part-time job at a coffee shop downtown, money tucked into an old envelope at the back of my drawer. While my father believed I was spending weekends preparing for college applications, I had been researching artists, sketching designs, and waiting for the right moment. That summer, I walked into a small tattoo parlor off Pike Street, handed over the envelope, and asked for a compass on my forearm. It was simple, nothing flashy, but to me it meant everything. It meant direction, independence, a promise that I would follow my own path no matter how difficult. The sting of the needle was nothing compared to the rush I felt when I looked down at the ink embedded in my skin. For the first time, I saw a piece of myself reflected back at me, permanent and undeniable. I drove home with my arm bandaged and my heart pounding, rehearsing explanations in my head. Maybe my father would surprise me. Maybe he would ask what it meant and I could tell him about charting my own course. Deep down, I already knew better. When he saw it, his reaction was worse than I imagined. His face flushed a color I had never seen before, a deep red that bordered on purple. He stepped so close I could feel the heat of his anger. His voice was cold, controlled, but sharp enough to cut. "You have 24 hours to find a way to remove that, or there will be consequences." I remember my hands shaking, my throat dry, but I forced myself to speak. "It is permanent, Dad, just like my decision to be myself." His eyes narrowed, and for a long moment we just stood there, the air heavy with everything unsaid. That night, when I returned to my room, there were brochures neatly stacked on my bed. Stanford, Harvard, Princeton, the schools my father worshipped. As I picked them up one by one, my new tattoo burned beneath the bandage, throbbing like a reminder of the war I had just declared. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the glossy covers, knowing I was not the son my father wanted. But for the first time in my life, I felt certain of who I was, even if it meant I would never fit into the family I was born into. I lay awake that night, listening to the silence of the house. Down the hall, Michael's laughter drifted faintly from his room as he spoke with friends about the future that seemed paved in gold for him. In my room, I traced the outline of the compass beneath the bandage and felt both terrified and liberated. That was the night I realized the line had been drawn. My father's world on one side, mine on the other. And I knew no matter how painful it became, I would never cross back. The fall after high school, Michael received his acceptance letter to Stanford. My father read it aloud in the living room like it was a proclamation for the entire neighborhood. His voice swelled with pride, as if he had personally earned the admission himself. My mother clapped her hands and wiped tears from her eyes while Michael stood there smiling, modestly basking in the praise. I sat on the couch with a sketchbook resting on my lap, pretending to be absorbed in the lines I was drawing. No one noticed when I slipped out of the room. A few months later, I opened my own envelope from the Art Institute of Chicago. My hands shook as I unfolded the letter, my eyes scanning the words, telling me I had been accepted with a partial scholarship. My chest filled with a mix of relief and pride. For once, I thought maybe my parents would see this as an accomplishment. That night, I placed the letter on the dinner table before my father could start his usual interrogation about grades or future plans. He glanced at it briefly, gave a tight smile, and then asked Michael how he was preparing for his freshman year at Stanford. The conversation shifted away from me as if I were invisible. During Thanksgiving break that year, Michael came home from Stanford and my father invited half the firm over for dinner. The house smelled of roasted turkey and sage, the table gleamed with polished silver, and every detail was arranged to perfection. As guests settled in, my father raised his glass and announced that his eldest son was thriving at Stanford, already impressing professors and preparing for a future in finance. Applause filled the room. My mother's face glowed with pride. When the applause died down, one of the guests turned to me and asked what I was studying. I opened my mouth, ready to speak, but my father cut in before I could answer. "Ethan is still finding his way. Michael, tell them about your debate tournament." Laughter followed, warm and approving, while my words dissolved unspoken. Later that evening, after the plates had been cleared and guests had moved into the living room for coffee, one of the partner's daughters sat beside me. She was an art history major and asked quietly if she could see some of my work. I pulled out my phone, eager to show someone who might understand. I scrolled to my portfolio images of pieces I had poured myself into lines and shadows that carried parts of me I could never say aloud. Just as I turned the screen toward her, my father appeared. His hand landed on the back of the couch like a warning. "I am sure nobody wants to see amateur sketches when we could be discussing the market outlook," he said smoothly, positioning himself between us. The girl smiled politely and drifted away. I sat frozen, my phone still glowing in my hand, the shame pressing down on me like a weight I could not shake. That night I packed my bag 3 days earlier than planned. My mother knocked softly on my door asking if I was all right. I told her I was tired. She nodded and left, never questioning why her son would drive 6 hours back to Chicago in the middle of the night. Michael texted me later apologizing. He said Dad did not know how to understand things outside his world. But apologies did not erase the silence at that dinner table or the humiliation I felt under my father's calculated dismissal. Chicago was harsh in winter, the wind biting through layers of clothing, the city both thrilling and unforgiving. But for the first time, I felt like I belonged somewhere. Surrounded by other artists, I no longer had to hide my sketches in the margins of notebooks. Professors pushed me hard, sometimes tearing my work apart in critiques. But unlike my father's rejection, their criticism came with guidance. I thrived in that environment. Still, every phone call home was a reminder that no matter what I achieved, it would never be enough. My father's voice carried the same flat tone. When Ethan decides to get serious, he would say, as if my entire life was a temporary detour. By sophomore year, I stopped telling my parents about my exhibitions or projects. Michael was thriving, earning internships with investment firms, bringing home accolades that kept my parents busy with pre. At Thanksgiving, my father toasted Michael's achievements at Morgan Stanley, while I sat at the end of the table picking at cold turkey. I felt more like a guest than a son. It was during that break that the realization hit me fully. This was not a temporary misunderstanding. It was a pattern that would never change. As the laughter from the living room floated down the hall, I packed my bag once again. My compass tattoo glinted faintly in the bathroom mirror as I rolled down my sleeve. I was no longer going to wait for a seat at a table where I was not wanted. I left the house quietly, the night air sharp in my lungs. My car was packed with clothes, sketchbooks, and a small box of art supplies. As I pulled away from the perfect lawn and the glowing windows, I felt both the ache of loss and the rush of freedom. My father's world had never been mine, and I was finally ready to build one of my own. In the spring of 2018, I packed everything I owned into a beat-up Honda Civic and drove south to Portland. The city felt alive in a way that Seattle never had. Murals stretched across brick walls, food trucks lined the streets, and there was a pulse of creativity that hummed through every neighborhood. I found a cramped one-bedroom apartment above a laundromat on the east side. The ceiling leaked when it rained and the pipes rattled at night, but it was mine. To make rent, I juggled 3 jobs. In the mornings, I poured coffee at a busy shop downtown. Afternoons, I stocked shelves at an art supply store, and weekends I bartended at a dive bar where the jukebox never stopped. My meals were cheap noodles and whatever vegetables I could find on sale. My heat kept low to save on utilities. Every night, no matter how exhausted I was, I sat at a small desk in the corner of my apartment, sketching designs until my eyelids gave out. It was during one of those long nights that I started dreaming about opening a studio of my own. I scribbled the words Iron Oak Tattoo across a blank page, the name inspired by a tree I used to sit beneath in a Portland park when I needed quiet. It felt solid, grounded, something that could withstand storms. The opportunity came sooner than I expected. A tiny storefront became available on Alberta Street, wedged between a used bookstore and a bike repair shop. The rent was just barely within reach. I signed the lease with hands shaking, wondering if I had just made the biggest mistake of my life. The space was nothing more than cracked floors and peeling paint, but as I stood in the middle of it, I could see what it would become. I painted the walls myself, hauled in second-hand furniture, and saved every tip to buy the right equipment. Word spread slowly. At first, a few walk-ins curious enough to try the new guy. I poured everything into each piece, treating every client like a canvas that deserved my best work. During that first year, I met Zach, a chef covered in tattoos who came in for a sleeve design. We struck up a conversation that stretched late into the night. He started inviting me to dinners where I met Amara, a photographer with a sharp eye for the city's underground art scene, and Rachel, a literature professor who wrote poetry under a different name. They became my circle, the family I had never really had. With them, I could be myself without apology. It was Zach who brought Daniel to the studio. Daniel was a graphic designer who wanted a minimalist piece across his shoulder. Something geometric and subtle. I remember how he watched every move of the needle with fascination, asking questions about line weight and shading. After his appointment, we lingered in the lobby talking about design, about growing up in families that never understood creativity, about the cost of following your own path. One conversation became many. Soon he was showing up not just for tattoos, but for dinners, for walks through the city, for quiet nights sketching side by side at my desk. Daniel became the first person who saw me completely and did not flinch. Not long after, Olivia Chen walked through my studio doors. She introduced herself as a freelance journalist covering art in the Pacific Northwest. She had seen a piece I posted online and wanted to learn more about my work. I expected a quick interview, but she spent hours asking about my process, my influences, my reasons for choosing tattooing as an art form. When she left, she promised to keep an eye on my career. I did not know then how much her words would matter later. By 2021, the studio had transformed. My calendar filled months in advance, clients traveling from other states just to sit in my chair. My Instagram following passed 120,000, and I started winning awards at regional conventions up and down the West Coast. Each recognition felt like a quiet victory against every dismissal my father had ever spoken. Yet when my mother mentioned my successes to him on a call, his response was always the same. Just drawing on skin, nothing that lasts. I tried not to let it sting, but it always did. Even as Iron Oak Tattoo thrived, even as my name began to appear in magazines, I carried the weight of my father's voice in my chest. Still, I pressed forward, ink on skin, building something that was finally mine. One night after closing the shop, I stood in the empty studio staring at the oak tree logo painted on the wall. My friend's laughter still echoed in my ears from dinner earlier. Daniel's hand warm in mine as we walked back through the rain. For the first time in my life, I felt the beginnings of home. Outside, Portland's streets buzzed with neon and music, but inside the studio it was quiet. I exhaled slowly, realizing I had crossed a line my father would never understand. And I knew I was not going back. The call came late on a Wednesday night while I was cleaning up the studio. My phone buzzed on the counter and Michael's name lit up the screen. It had been weeks since we last spoke, so I answered quickly, brushing ink-stained gloves off my hands. His voice came through excited, almost breathless. "I wanted you to hear it from me first. Sophia and I are engaged." For a moment I just stood there, the hum of the tattoo machine still echoing in my ears. I pictured my older brother, steady and polished, the one who never seemed to falter, announcing news that would send our family into a frenzy of pride. Sophia was a corporate lawyer from Boston, someone I had met briefly at a holiday dinner. She was intelligent, elegant, and came from the kind of wealthy family my father adored. I let the silence stretch too long, and Michael laughed nervously. "You're still there, right?" I shook myself and smiled, even though he could not see me. "I'm here. Congratulations, man, I mean it. I'm happy for you." He sighed with relief, and we talked for a while, Michael filling me in on the proposal, the ring, and the way Sophia's parents, the Carters, had welcomed him with open arms. They were established in Boston society, he said. Owners of a private art gallery and connected to major firms in the city. I could hear the excitement in his voice, and beneath it a note of obligation, as if he understood the weight this marriage carried for our family. After we hung up, I sat in the quiet studio staring at the oak logo on the wall. My chest was warm with genuine happiness for my brother, but at the same time a cold unease pressed in. I knew how our father would treat this wedding. It would not just be a celebration, it would be a performance, an opportunity to elevate his reputation through the image of a perfect son, marrying into a perfect family. And where would I fit in that picture? The next day, my mother called, her voice bright in a way that felt rehearsed. "Have you heard the news? Your brother and Sophia are engaged. It will be the event of the year. Your father is over the moon." I could almost hear my father pacing in the background, already planning, already aligning every detail to suit the family image. I wanted to ask if I would be invited, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I said I was glad that Michael deserved happiness. My mother softened her tone, lowering, "He really does, and I hope you'll be part of it." Then the line clicked and she was gone, her words neither a promise nor a certainty. A week later, Richard called me directly, something he rarely did unless it concerned appearances. His voice was firm, formal, like he was already delivering a speech. "Your brother's engagement to Sophia Carter is a tremendous opportunity. The Carters are respected, influential, exactly the kind of people our family should be connected to." He paused as if weighing whether to continue. "Do not forget, this wedding is not just about Michael. It reflects on all of us." I clenched the phone tighter, waiting for him to say what I already suspected. But instead he shifted his tone, almost commanding. "You will conduct yourself appropriately if you are there. No distractions, no drawing attention. This is about Michael, about family." He did not have to say more. His warning hung heavy between us. After the call, I walked through the rain-soaked streets of Portland, letting the cold drops soak into my jacket. I was genuinely happy for Michael, but in the pit of my stomach I felt the familiar ache of doubt. Could I attend without being treated like a liability? Would my father find a way to erase me from the day altogether? That night, Daniel cooked dinner in our apartment, the smell of garlic and rosemary filling the air. I told him about Michael's engagement, about the Carters, about the call from my father. He listened quietly, setting down the pan and leaning against the counter. "So the question is, are you going to let them decide where you belong, or are you going to show up as yourself?" I wanted to answer with confidence, but the truth caught in my throat. I wanted to celebrate my brother, to stand beside him. Yet every part of me knew that for my father my presence was a risk. I watched Daniel move around the kitchen, calm and steady, and for a moment I wished my family could see me the way he did. As I sat at the table later, the city lights spilling through the window, I felt the weight of two truths pressing against each other. My brother's happiness filled me with pride, but my father's shadow hung over it, threatening to erase me once again. I raised a glass of water, alone with my thoughts, and whispered a quiet toast into the night. To Michael and Sophia, may their future be everything they hope for. I did not know then that my part in that future would become the center of a storm none of us saw coming. The call came on a gray afternoon in March, while I was sketching at the studio. My phone buzzed with my father's name, and before I could convince myself to ignore it, I swiped to answer. His voice was clipped, each word measured like a verdict. You are not coming to Michael's wedding. You will embarrass us. I sat back in my chair, stunned. I had prepared myself for rules, for warnings, for some speech about appearances, but not this. I tried to breathe, tried to keep my voice steady. Dad, it's my brother's wedding. I should be there. He continued as though he had not heard me. If you insist on attending, there are conditions. You will cover every tattoo, long sleeves, gloves if necessary. You will cut that hair of yours, return it to something respectable. You will wear the suit I choose, not whatever you consider acceptable. And you will come alone. Daniel is not welcome. His words landed like stones, heavy and deliberate. For a moment I could not speak, the room around me blurring as though the air itself had thickened. When I finally found my voice, it sounded strange even to me. You're asking me to erase myself. My father's tone did not waver. I am protecting your brother, protecting this family. Do you understand what the Carters represent? They are old Boston, money-cultured, influential. They expect dignity. They expect refinement. And you, Ethan, are not capable of that without help. Heat rose in my chest, anger and shame twisting together. My hand tightened around the phone until my knuckles burned. You care more about strangers at a country club than your own son, silence stretched on the line, cold and deliberate. Then he said, if you cannot respect these conditions, then you are not welcome. It is that simple. The call ended before I could respond. I sat there staring at the blank screen, my pulse pounding in my ears. Around me the studio hummed with the quiet of after-hours, sketches scattered across the table, unfinished lines waiting for color. My vision blurred as if the walls themselves were closing in. That night, Daniel found me sitting on the couch in our apartment, lights off, the phone still clutched in my hand. He set down a bag of groceries and came to sit beside me. What happened? I told him, every word like broken glass in my mouth. His jaw tightened, eyes darkening with anger. So he wants you to disappear. He wants me to turn into someone I'm not. I pressed my hands against my face, the words spilling out. Cover the tattoos, cut my hair, wear his suit, pretend Daniel doesn't exist. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. Then he touched my arm, firm and steady. Ethan, if you walk into that wedding under those conditions, you won't just lose yourself. You'll prove to him that he was right to try to erase you. I wanted to believe him, but the ache inside me was raw. All I had wanted was to stand beside my brother on his wedding day, to celebrate him without shame. Now even that seemed out of reach. 2 days later, Michael texted me late at night. Sorry about Dad. I tried to change his mind. He won't budge. I want you there, I really do. But he won't allow it. I stared at the words, the glow of the screen painting the room in pale light. My throat tightened. I typed and erased replies, wanting to scream, wanting to beg, wanting to say I understood. In the end, I sent only 3 words. I love you. Hours later, unable to sleep, I wandered through the studio. My sketches looked back at me from the walls, silent witnesses to everything I had fought for. I thought about the compass tattoo on my arm, the promise I made to myself years ago to follow my own direction no matter the cost. Now that cost was clear. The weight of it pressed down on me until I felt hollow. I lowered myself into the chair by the window, staring out at the rain-slick streets. My reflection stared back in the glass tattoos winding across my skin hair. Unruly eyes heavy with exhaustion. For the first time in years, I felt like that 18-year-old kid again, standing in front of my father, told that I was nothing but a shame. Only now the shame was no longer mine. It belonged to him, and I knew I could not give him what he wanted. I leaned my head back against the chair and closed my eyes, the storm outside rattling the windows. Somewhere across the country, plans for a wedding were unfolding, polished and perfect, and here I sat, caught between love for my brother and the rejection of a father who would never accept me. The silence of the studio pressed in, and I let it, knowing this was not the end of the story, but only the beginning of something I could not yet name. I thought maybe my mother would be the bridge. Late one evening, I dialed her number, pacing the narrow kitchen of our apartment, while the hum of the refrigerator filled the sense. She answered softly, as if she already knew what I was calling about. I told her what Dad had said, how he had banned me from Michael's wedding unless I agreed to erase myself. My voice cracked when I asked if she believed that was fair. There was a pause, then the sound of her breath on the line. "Your father is under a lot of pressure right now, Ethan. The Carters are very traditional. This wedding means so much for him, for Michael, for all of us. Please don't make it harder than it already is." I closed my eyes, gripping the counter until my knuckles whitened. I wanted her to say she was proud of me, that she loved me as I was, that she would stand up to him for once. Instead, her words landed like a quiet betrayal. "So that's it? You want me to just disappear so Dad doesn't have to explain me?" She did not answer. The silence stretched between us, louder than anything she could have said. When she finally whispered, "I love you, Ethan," it was too soft, too hollow. We ended the call, and I sat in the dark kitchen staring at the phone in my hand. Realizing that my mother's love had limits I had never wanted to believe existed. Daniel found me there, hunched over the counter, my chest heavy with that familiar ache. He pulled out a chair and sat down across from me. "You look like someone pulled the floor out from under you." I told him what she had said, every word spilling out like poison. He listened, his jaw set, then reached across the table and took my hand. "Ethan, you can't keep trying to win their approval. You'll die a little more every time." I looked at him, wanting to argue, but he pressed on. "What if we just left? That weekend, while they're all at the wedding, we go to Cape Cod, rent a cottage, walk the beach, make new memories instead of sitting here wondering what they're saying about you." The idea hung in the air, a lifeline pulling me away from the storm. But something inside me resisted. If I didn't show up, if I didn't fight back, wasn't I letting them win? I shook my head slowly. "I can't just walk away." Daniel's grip tightened. "Then don't walk away. But don't go begging either. Do something that's yours. Something that tells them you were here whether they wanted you or not." That night I lay awake, listening to the city outside our window, the sound of cars hissing through the rain. My mind spun with images of the wedding, of Michael standing at the altar, of my father shaking hands with the Carters, of myself erased from the story. But alongside the pain came a spark, small but insistent. Maybe I didn't have to be erased. Maybe I could speak without saying a word. The next morning I sat at my workbench in the studio with my sketchbook open, pencil moving before I even knew what I was drawing. An album, leather-bound, filled with photographs and memories, but designed with the same care I gave to every tattoo. A piece of art that was personal, undeniable, impossible to ignore. If they wouldn't let me stand at my brother's side, then I would send something that carried me there anyway. For days I threw myself into the work, I called relatives for photos, dug through old digital folders, even asked my mother for childhood pictures under the pretense of nostalgia. I sketched intricate borders for each page, blending my tattoo style into elegant designs. I tooled the leather cover with symbols only Michael and I would recognize: the treehouse our grandfather built, the outline of our old dog constellations, from nights we spent talking in the backyard. At the center, I planned the final page, a portrait of Michael on the night of his high school graduation, wearing the cap and gown my father had bragged about for months. But instead of the polished smile, I captured the look he had given me when no one else was watching, a look of quiet solidarity. Beneath it, I would write words my father would never understand, but my brother would feel in his bones. Family means seeing each other as we are. Love always, Ethan. When I showed Daniel the sketches, he smiled, that quiet kind of smile that said he believed in me even when I didn't. "This isn't revenge," he said, "it's truth." I nodded, though my chest was tight. I didn't know how my family would react, if they would even let Michael see it. But I knew I had to try. I had to leave a mark that could not be erased. As the album took shape on my desk, each page layered with ink and memory, the anger in my chest eased into something steadier. I wasn't going to crash Michael's wedding. I wasn't going to scream or demand a seat at the table. But I would send this. And in sending it, I would remind them that I existed, that I had always been part of this family, no matter how hard my father tried to deny it. The night before I sealed the package, Daniel and I sat by the window. The lights of Portland stretched out beneath us. He wrapped an arm around my shoulders, pulling me close. "You don't have to fight them the way they fight you," he said. "Sometimes the loudest voice is the one that refuses to be silenced." I leaned against him, the album resting on the table beside us, bound in leather and memory. For the first time in weeks, the heaviness in my chest lifted. I wasn't going to Michael's wedding, but a part of me would be there all the same. When I held the finished leather album in my hands, memories came rushing back in waves. The stitching was still fresh, the smell of worked leather strong, and my fingers traced over the small oak tree embossed in the corner. It was not just decoration. It was a marker, a private symbol that only Michael would understand. It reminded me of the treehouse we had built together one summer, nailing crooked planks into branches while Dad shouted from below that it was unsafe. We built it anyway, and for weeks it became our kingdom, hidden from a world that demanded too much order. I remembered the baseball game in the rain when we were 12 and 15, sliding into muddy bases until our uniforms were unrecognizable. Dad had been furious that we ruined clothes, but Michael had stood in front of me, shielding me from the worst of the lecture. He had always been the one to cover for me when my choices strayed outside of the lines Dad drew so harshly. Sneaking into the garage late at night, listening to music he deemed worthless, laughing when we were supposed to be quiet. It was those moments I wanted to capture, not the polished version of Michael that my father paraded at family dinners, but the brother I actually knew. Each page of the album held fragments of that truth. A photo of us smeared with dirt after a backyard football game, framed by tattoo-styled lines that twisted like vines. A snapshot of Michael's first car, dented on one side, decorated with symbols I drew into the border that only he would recall. The last page, the portrait of him at graduation, his eyes full of something more than ambition, framed with constellations that mirrored the night sky we once lay under as kids. It was a rebellion, yes, but a quiet one. I was not interested in humiliating my father outright. What I wanted was to leave a record of the truth, something that could not be silenced or rewritten by his obsession with perfection. Daniel watched me pack the album into a handcrafted wooden bow lined with blue silk. He ran his hand across the lid and gave me a small nod. "It is beautiful, Ethan. It is more than beautiful. It is you. I tightened the twine around the package and wrote the address carefully. Willow Creek Country Club, Boston. My instructions were simple, attached to a note inside. Please open this during the reception. At the post office the next morning, I stood at the counter holding the box longer than necessary before finally letting it go. The clerk slid it onto the scale, typed in the information, and handed me the receipt. 2-day delivery. It would arrive well before the wedding. I walked out into the cool morning air, my chest both lighter and heavier. That night I sat on the couch with Daniel, the TV flickering muted light across the room. He leaned against me, his hand resting over mine. "You think they will actually open it?" he asked. I thought about my father, about the way he controlled every detail, the way he dismissed anything that threatened his image. If it were up to him, the box would vanish before Michael even saw it. But weddings are chaotic. Things slip through, and if it reached Michael's hands, I knew he would open it. He always had a way of searching for what was real, even when he was trapped in Dad's orbit. I exhaled slowly. They will open it. Maybe not my father, but Michael will. Daniel smiled faintly, as if he trusted my certainty more than I did. Then we go to Cape Cod that weekend. Let them have their performance and we'll have our own escape. The days leading up to the wedding felt stretched thin. I threw myself into work at the studio, distracting myself with clients and designs. But every quiet moment circled back to the same thought. Somewhere in Boston, at a country club dressed in flowers and white linen, my family would gather without me. My father's speeches would flow. Michael would smile for photos, and my absence would be unspoken erased. Except for the box. The night before the wedding, Daniel and I loaded the car with bags for our weekend at the Cape. As we drove out of Portland, rain tapping the windshield, I checked the tracking number one last time. Delivered. My album was there, tucked inside the grand halls of Willow Creek Country Club, waiting for its moment. Daniel glanced at me as the highway lights flashed across his face. "You're quiet." I watched the road ahead, the line of headlights stretching into the dark. "I'm thinking about Michael, about what his face will look like when he sees it." We fell into silence after that, the sound of the engine filling the space between us. I rested my hand against the window cool glass beneath my palm and pictured the reception hall. Laughter, clinking glasses, my father shaking hands with the Carters, Sophia radiant in her gown. And then somewhere in the middle of it all, my brother opening the box, turning the pages, seeing himself as I remembered him. As the miles slipped by, a quiet resolve settled over me. I would not be there in person, but my presence would fill that room in a way my father could not erase. The truth was already waiting for them, bound in leather, and memory ready to speak when I could not. The cottage in Cape Cod was small and weathered, its white paint peeling in places, but it sat only a short walk from the beach. Daniel opened the windows wide that first morning, and the salt air drifted through, mixing with the smell of coffee brewing in the pot. We spent hours walking along the shoreline, collecting shells, letting the rhythm of the waves soak into us. It should have been peaceful, a perfect escape, but my phone never left my pocket. I kept checking the screen, waiting for a message, a call, something from Boston. By the afternoon of the wedding day, the silence broke. A message from my father appeared, short and sharp. "You are no longer in my will." I sat on the porch, staring at the words, the sea stretching endless in front of me. Daniel came out carrying 2 mugs of coffee and saw my face. "What is it?" I handed him the phone. He read it, his jaw tightening. "So now he's trying to buy your obedience from beyond the grave." I let out a hollow laugh. It is what he does. Money is his leash. That evening, with the sun setting over the water, I called Mark Davis, a lawyer friend I had met years earlier through a client. He answered on the second ring, his voice calm and professional. I explained what had happened, the threat, the will. He listened without interrupting, then said, Ethan, men like your father use inheritance as a weapon. It is control dressed up as generosity. You have two choices: accept the leash or cut it and live free. I sat in silence. The gulls crying in the distance. Mark spoke again, softer now. You built your own life. You are not dependent on him. His money comes with strings that will strangle you. If he takes it away, you lose nothing but the chains. After we hung up, I walked down to the beach alone, the wet sand cool beneath my feet. The waves rushed up, erasing my footsteps as quickly as I made them. I thought about every time my father had dangled approval like a prude's, every time he had measured love by conditions. Now he was trying to measure it in dollars, in legal documents. Daniel found me standing there, staring at the horizon. He slipped his hand into mine without speaking. I squeezed it finally, saying the words aloud. I do not care about the money. I do not want it. He nodded, his eyes reflecting the fading light. Then he cannot touch you anymore. Back at the cottage, we lit a small fire in the stone hearth. Daniel poured wine and we sat in the glow, the crackle filling the silence between us. My phone lay on the table, still buzzing with messages I ignored. Somewhere in Boston, my father was celebrating his performance, proud of the alliances he thought he had secured. But here, in the quiet of the Cape, I made my own decision. I would not let him own me with promises of inheritance or threats of exclusion. My life, my art, my love for Daniel, all of it had been built without him, and all of it would endure without a single penny from his fortune. The fire burned low shadows dancing across the walls, and I leaned back, letting the warmth sink in. For the first time in years, I felt a different kind of freedom, one that no amount of money could buy and no threat could take away. The morning after the wedding, the sky above Cape Cod was bright and clear, gulls calling over the surf. Daniel brewed coffee and we sat on the porch, the sea stretching endless before us. I told myself I would not check my phone, but I did, scrolling through the messages piling up. Most were from unknown numbers, some from relatives, one from Michael that simply said, "Call me." My chest tightened. At the same time, miles away in Boston, the reception at Willow Creek Country Club was in full swing. The Carters had spared no expense. Chandeliers glittered above long tables draped in white linen. The air filled with laughter and the clinking of crystal glasses. Sophia was radiant in her gown, Michael standing tall beside her, and Richard moved through the room with the precision of a man hosting not just a wedding but a summit of reputation. The gift table sat near the stage, piled high with silver-wrapped boxes and envelopes. At first, the wooden box with my album drew little attention, but Sophia's mother noticed it when she passed by. She paused, running her hand over the carved lid. "This one looks different." Sophia came over, curious. "It has no tag, no card, just instructions." She held up the note I had left. "Please open during the reception." Michael froze when he saw the box, his chest tightening as he recognized the embossing of the oak tree in the corner. He swallowed hard, his pulse quickening. "It is from Ethan," he whispered to Sophia. Richard caught the name and stiffened. "Leave it. We do not need any surprises tonight." But James Carter, Sophia's father, had already stepped forward. He was a man who prided himself on taste and curiosity, a lifelong patron of the arts. His eyes lit up as he examined the craftsmanship. "This is remarkable work. Who sent it?" Michael's voice was quiet but firm. "My brother." Sophia's mother smiled warmly. "Then let's see what it is." Richard moved quickly, his hand outstretched. "I said leave it." His tone was sharp enough to hush the chatter at the nearest tables, but James Carter ignored him. He lifted the lid, revealing the leather album inside its surface. hand-tooled with intricate designs that shimmered under the chandeliers. The room quieted as he opened the first page. A photo of two boys covered in mud after a backyard game framed with delicate ink like climbing vines. Gasps rose from the guests as they leaned closer. Page after page revealed childhood moments, rebellious laughter. Memories captured in a style unlike anything they had seen before. Then came the portrait, the final page. Michael in his graduation gown, his eyes alive with the spark of independence. Beneath it, the inscription, "Family means seeing each other as we are. Love always, Ethan." For a moment, silence swept across the hall, heavy and unbroken. James Carter's face shifted as realization dawned. He turned to Richard, his voice cutting through the stillness. "Wait a moment. Are you telling me your son is Ethan Miller?" Whispers rippled through the room. Ethan Miller, the tattoo artist whose work had been featured in magazines, the one whose pieces were discussed in New York and Los Angeles, the one with a following that stretched across the country. Richard opened his mouth, but no words came. His face drained of color, his posture rigid as though his carefully constructed facade had cracked in front of everyone. James Carter shook his head slowly, incredulous. "I have been following his work for years. I even tried to commission a piece last year, but could not get on his calendar. And you never mentioned that this man, this artist, is your son." All eyes turned to Richard. He stood frozen, caught in the storm of revelation. Michael, cheeks flushed, closed the album gently and looked around the room. "This is who my brother is. And he deserves to be seen." At that, the applause began, hesitant at first, then swelling into a wave that filled the hall. Sophia smiled, her hand resting over Michael's. James Carter clasped the album, lifting it slightly as if it were a treasure. "Extraordinary. Absolutely extraordinary." And Richard, standing in the center of his own carefully orchestrated performance, found himself speechless. His plan to erase me had collapsed in front of the very people he had wanted most to impress. Back in Cape Cod, I did not yet know the details. All I had were messages stacking on my phone, my brother's text flashing again at the top of the screen, "Call me." I hesitated before pressing Michael's name. The phone warm in my hand, the waves crashing faintly outside the cottage windows. When he answered, the noise behind him was overwhelming voices overlapping, the faint echo of music and clinking glasses. "Ethan," he said, his voice breathless. "Do you have any idea what just happened?" My stomach tightened. "Tell me." They opened it. Everyone saw. He paused as if trying to choose the right words. "The Carters loved it. They loved you." I gripped the edge of the table, Daniel watching me with concern. "What do you mean, loved it?" Michael laughed, a sound that was half disbelief, half relief. "James Carter called you extraordinary. Linda was furious that Dad kept you out. She actually said it in front of everyone. She said it was shameful that you were excluded." I closed my eyes, a flood of heat rushing through me. My father, always so careful with appearances, being called out by his new in-laws in front of an entire ballroom. Michael kept talking, his words tumbling over themselves. "Sophia was crying, Ethan. Not because she was upset, but because she said she was proud to marry into a family that had you in it." Everyone was clapping. It was chaos. I pressed the phone tighter against my ear, my heart racing. "And Dad." Michael's voice lowered. He tried to stop it. He said it was inappropriate, but nobody listened. The Carters shut him down. He looked like the ground had opened beneath him. Daniel touched my arm gently, grounding me. I forced myself to breathe. In the ballroom, Margaret hovered at Richard's side, her face pale, her hands trembling slightly as she tried to smooth over conversations that could not be smoothed. Guests whispered, some openly staring, others approaching the Carters to praise their appreciation of art, their support of family truth. Richard stood rigid, his jaw clenched, but the tide had turned against him. Near the edge of the crowd, a familiar figure snapped photographs. Olivia Chen, the art journalist who had visited my studio months earlier, raised her camera again, capturing the leather album as it lay open under the light. Later, she slipped into a quiet corner, typing furiously on her phone, her fingers flying as she drafted what would become the headline circulating before the night ended. Prominent wedding erupts in unexpected spotlight as hidden artist Ethan Miller revealed. By the time the reception ended, her post had already spread, picked up by art blogs, retweeted by gallery owners, shared by tattoo enthusiasts who recognized the style instantly. Back in Cape Cod, my phone buzzed relentlessly. Unknown numbers, art magazines, local reporters, clients, even old classmates. I stared at the flood of notifications, my chest tightening, torn between dread and an odd flicker of satisfaction. Daniel sat beside me, reading the screen over my shoulder. "You are trending," he murmured with a smile. I laughed, sharp and disbelieving. "I am the story at my brother's wedding without even being there." The phone rang again, Michael this time, his voice thick with emotion. "Ethan, they know now. Everyone knows. You cannot be erased anymore." I sank back into the couch, my pulse still hammering. For years I had lived with my father's voice in my head, telling me I was nothing more than an embarrassment. And now, in front of the very people he wanted most to impress, the truth had come crashing down. The fire crackled in the hearth, shadows dancing across the walls. Daniel leaned closer, his arm brushing mine. "You wanted to leave a mark. You did." I let the phone rest on the table, my hands trembling as I rubbed my eyes. Relief and sorrow collided inside me, a strange mix that left me both lighter and heavier. I had not been there to see it, but I could imagine it clearly. The chandeliers, the shocked faces, the silence before the applause. And my father finally stripped of the control he had clung to for decades. For the first time I smiled. Not a broad smile, not joy exactly, but something steadier. Something that felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. The phone buzzed again, vibrating against the wood. I reached for it, my pulse still uneven, and knew that whatever came next, nothing would ever be the same. The calls did not stop. For days my phone lit up with my father's name, each voicemail slightly different. His voice slipping from anger to hesitation, from command to something that almost sounded like desperation. By the fourth day, he said a word I had never heard from him before. "Please." I sat in the studio after closing the machine, silent, the smell of ink and disinfectant still hanging in the air. Daniel leaned against the counter, arms folded, watching me scroll through the messages. "You are going to have to face him eventually," he said gently. A week later, I agreed. We met at a quiet restaurant in Seattle, a place neutral enough that neither of us could claim it as our territory. I arrived early, my chest tight, my palms damp. When I walked in, he was already there, sitting stiffly at a corner table, a glass of scotch in front of him, untouched. He stood when I approached, uncertain whether to extend his hand. I slid into the seat across from him, my heartbeat loud in my ears. "You look well," he said finally. I stared at him, my voice flat. "Do not start with pleasantries." He cleared his throat, his fingers tightening around the glass. "Very well. I owe you an apology." The words hit me like a strange echo. I leaned forward, my voice low but steady. "You banned me from Michael's wedding. You told me I would ruin the day. Do you understand what that did to me?" His eyes flickered, but he did not look away. "I thought I was protecting our family's image." I shook my head, bitterness rising. "No, you were protecting yourself, your image, not family. You erased me because I did not fit your definition of success." Silence stretched between us, broken only by the clink of ice in his glass as he finally lifted it and took a sip. I do not know how to undo the damage, Ethan. But I need you to know something. His voice faltered, then grew quieter. When I was at Princeton, I wanted to be a writer. Poetry, fiction, essays. I had a professor who encouraged me, told me I had a voice worth cultivating. I stared at him, disbelief cutting through my anger. You, writing? He nodded slowly. I brought my first manuscript home one summer. My father found it, read a few pages, and tore it to pieces in front of me. He said no son of his would waste his life scribbling words when he could be building something respectable. His shoulders sagged, the weight of old humiliation still visible. I put it away after that. Law school was the only path he would accept, and I excelled, yes, but every success was chained to his approval. I gripped the edge of the table, my throat tight. So you let him kill your dream, and then you tried to kill mine. He flinched, his gaze dropping. I did not see it that way until now. The sound of footsteps pulled our attention. Michael appeared, still in his work suit, his tie loosened, his face lined with exhaustion, but also determination. He slid into the seat beside me without asking. You told him, Michael said, looking at our father. About Princeton. Richard gave a small nod. Michael exhaled, his jaw tightening. Then you know what comes next. You cannot keep doing this, Dad. You cannot break us because you were broken. Richard's hand trembled slightly as he set the glass down. I do not know how to change. You start by admitting it, Michael said firmly. By facing what you did to Ethan. By facing what you did to all of us. My father's eyes shifted back to me. His voice was rough. I never understood you. I never tried to. That was my failure, not yours. If you are willing, I would like to see your studio, to see what you built. For a long moment I said nothing. My pulse hammered in my ears, old wounds screaming against the fragile possibility of healing. Daniel's words echoed faintly in my memory. You are going to have to face him eventually. Finally, I leaned back in my chair, my voice steady. You want to see my world? Fine. But when you walk through those doors, you do not get to dismiss it. You do not get to call it a phase. You look at it for what it is. My life. Richard nodded, his face drawn, his shoulders sagging as though the admission had cost him everything. Next week, he said quietly, if you will have me. Michael placed his hand on the table, bridging the gap between us. One step at a time. The waiter arrived with our meals, but none of us moved to touch the plates. We sat there in the dim light. The past pressing close, the future uncertain, but for the first time the wall between us had cracked. A week later, the door to Iron Oak Tattoo opened and my parents walked in. Margaret's eyes darted across the walls, taking in the framed artwork, the spotless workstations, the soft hum of machines in the background. Richard followed slowly, his hands clasped behind his back, his face tight as if bracing for impact. I led them through the studio, introducing my team. Each artist shook their hands politely, professionalism radiating from every corner. This is where I spend most of my life, I said quietly, watching my father scan the shelves of ink, the sterilization equipment, the framed magazine features on the wall. He nodded, his jaw working as if he were swallowing something heavy. This is not what I imagined. It rarely is, I replied. We moved into the back where a client was finishing a session. She smiled warmly when she saw us. Her forearm was wrapped in fresh bandages. I explained that she was part of our community program covering scars from domestic violence with new designs. Richard's eyes flickered, his composure faltering as she thanked me in front of him for giving her a piece of her body back. When we stepped outside for air, I saw his hands tremble. He cleared his throat, his voice low. I did not realize. You never wanted to, I said, but softer this time. Margaret placed her hand gently on his arm, her own eyes wet. It is beautiful, Ethan, truly. For the first time, Richard looked at me not with judgment, but with something else, something like recognition. Later that evening, Michael and Sophia came by, their faces glowing with a secret they could not contain. Over dinner in my apartment, Michael finally grinned and said, "We are expecting." Sophia laughed, her hand resting on her stomach. "We want you to paint the mural for the nursery, something full of imagination, something only you could create." The words stopped me cold. For years I had been the outcast, the embarrassment. Now I was being asked to help build a future for the next Miller child. My chest tightened with emotion. "I would be honored," I whispered. The following month brought even more unexpected news. James Carter called personally, his voice warm and enthusiastic. "Ethan, the work you created for Michael's wedding album deserves to be seen. We would like to host a private exhibition for you in Boston." My hands shook as I listened, the irony not lost on me. The very city where my father had tried to erase me would now be the place where my art stood in the spotlight. Standing alone in the studio late one night, I thought about the strange path that had led here, about how revenge had not come in the form of destruction or cruelty, but in truth. Truth wrapped in leather and ink, opened in a ballroom where my father's power crumbled. Revenge had not been about punishing him. It had been about refusing to let his version of the story be the only one. It had been about forcing the truth into the light so that change became unavoidable. When I painted the first sketches for the nursery mural, I added a small oak tree in the corner, its branches stretching upward. Around it swirled constellations, symbols of resilience and freedom. It was not just for the baby, it was for all of us. I know now that families do not heal because one person wins and another loses. They heal when the truth can no longer be denied, when love finds its way through the cracks left by years of slits. Have you ever been cast aside by your own family, told you were not enough as you are? Share your story with me. Maybe, just maybe, your truth will become the light that forces change, the real spotlight you never expected.